My name's Guy Sefton. I started my career at Amazon in the big beast of the corporate world, kind of learn a lot, and then also wanted to apply that to impact and the climate, using some of those learnings about being data-driven and things like this, customer obsessed. So have since then gone into impact investing, and then further on began thinking about Climate Guardians. What about you, Martin?
Thanks, Guy. Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Volkov. I started my career in startups, transitioned into the impact space and also startups about three and a half years ago. Have worked in a variety of different things across the impact spectrum, from a consulting perspective, from a think tank perspective, from a venture building perspective. And I have been working on impact advocacy, specifically activism and advocacy, for the last year and a half. And I met Guy a couple months back, and we've been working together on Climate Guardians for about a month and a half.
Cool. So what is Climate Guardians? What's the idea? The mission that we have is to make climate action irresistible, which is a big thing. But what we believe is, as citizens who care about the planet and who care about the future generations, we believe that there's more that we have to say. There's more that we have to say than voting every 3 to 5 years. There's more that we have to say than maybe changing our consumer habits a little bit. We believe that we actually have the power to shape the world the way we want to see it, and live in the world that we want to live in, which is why at Climate Guardians, what we're doing is empowering citizens to actually harness their voice for the climate. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a story about the National Rifle Association. So what on earth has the NRA got to do with the climate crisis? So there are 5 million Americans in the NRA out of about 330 million Americans who live. So that's about, 1-2% of the American population. And yet gun laws continue to be supported. How does this all add up then? So when a politician or journalist goes onto a news article about gun law, they're going to actually see probably like 50% of the comments supporting it. And so you have a very small minority, but it's very active and it's very engaged and it's very loud and very vocal. And it's structured for influencing power, basically.
So maybe to bring that back a little bit to climate. Again, as we just heard, about 1.5% of Americans are in the NRA, yet the NRA is so powerful. So how does that actually compare to climate? Well, if we look at recent psychological studies, it's quite eye-opening. Recent psychological studies are showing that about 70% of Gen Zers, 16 to 25-year-olds, are thinking about climate change and its impacts every single day. 4 out of 10, very shockingly, at least to me, are reconsidering having kids because of climate change. So then when we think about and try to compare what's going on, these Gen Zers have climate anxiety. A lot of us that are older than Gen Z also have climate anxiety. How can we convert that into a powerful force? How can we convert that into agency? And how can we empower these 70% or so? And one rule that we've been zoning around has actually been a very famous rule called the 3.5% rule, which has come out of Harvard. It's research on the history of nonviolent protests, and where the researcher had analyzed the history of civil protest, and she concluded that any nonviolent movement that had engaged consistently, at least 3.5% of the population had succeeded. So therefore, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how can we build a sense of agency and how can we empower this large majority of Gen Z and also people that are just climate conscious in general to create agency and to allow us to reach some of these critical tipping points. So what does building agency actually mean from a practical standpoint? Well, it can mean a variety of different things, but at a high level, it's really using your voice. This could be either participating in local initiatives, it could be reaching out to individuals or organizations. Think anything from local business people, politicians, all the way through companies. It could be talking with friends and family at the dinner table. Could be also posting on social media or joining local groups. But maybe to talk a little bit about our inspiration for also building Climate Guardians and thinking through what's been going on that validates a lot of the momentum that we're seeing beyond just statistics are recent things that have been going on in Berlin. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, Berlin, over the last 2 years, has gone through a referendum called Berlin 2030. This referendum was seeking to change Berlin's climate neutrality goals and move them from 2045 as sort of targets to 2030 as firm commitments. And the impact potential of this referendum was massive. What ended up happening? Over 400,000 people went out and voted for this referendum. Actually, a majority of the people that went out and voted. Unfortunately, this referendum did not reach the quorum necessary and has not passed. Yet we've learned so many lessons through it. We've learned that the willingness to go out and use your voice exists. We've learned that quantification helps motivate people. We've seen that when you scope things at the local level, people will want to jump in because they realize that it will that any change will impact their reality. And lastly, we've learned that speaking to the who is extremely important when you're trying to attract allies.
Cool. So we just want to talk a little bit about what's been going on with Climate Guardians. We're pretty early in the process, but there are a couple of things, kind of early wins to call out. So we've been running a beta campaign. We've been working with some pilot customers in Berlin and in London. We've already seen like a little bit of traction, which is fantastic. So 9 days after we first sent out the first personalized appeals, we sent one which was on behalf of someone, a customer of a bank, and the bank actually got back to that pilot customer after 9 days, and they said, hey, we want to set up a call with you and talk about this. So we immediately see there's traction in this. When we use our voices, companies actually take notice. There's another example actually of someone who sent a direct message to a local cafe and said, hey, it's 2023. You're charging more for oat milk than you are for cow's milk, and you're also talking about sustainable branding and calling greenwashing. And the cafe got back within 2 or 3 days and was like, you know, you're right, and we're actually changing our prices. So it's early doors, but we're already seeing the power of what it means to harness your voice, and we see a huge amount of potential in this. When we try to estimate how much impact could each personal appeal take, so a personal appeal could be an email, writing a letter, posting on social media, direct messaging, etc. So let's say we assume it takes 10,000 of these appeals, and by the time you get to the 10,000th, you can actually convince, let's say, one of the top 5 supermarkets. This is just one example of our campaigns, to introduce an eco score. In other words, sharing more information with customers on the product packaging about the ecological impact of their products. And let's say the supermarket's going to do this actually, but by these 10,000 appeals, we've actually made them do it 5 years earlier. And then the customers in the supermarket, then on average, let's say their food emissions go down by, let's say, 15%. So that actually means that each individual appeal is saving about 600 tons of greenhouse gases, which ends up being about 370 flights from London to LA, or an entire German lifetime's worth of carbon emissions. Couple of minutes that you spend actually putting together a letter on our website and sending it. So it's maybe a much more authentic way of actually offsetting carbon than currently the kind of carbon offsets that are currently available.
So as we know, with the life of every impact entrepreneur, there's a lot of challenges, and we wanted to share a couple just to and through this community to see what resonates and to also reflect on our personal journeys as well. So as we've been working in this field of advocacy and also impact entrepreneurship, there's a couple that stand out for us. So obviously, telling the story is quite key and quite important, especially nowadays when there's so much momentum that's going on in climate, and there's so much positive, but also there's also so much greenwashing. It's important to find an authentic story and to continue to practice it and to continue to understand how does your story really resonate with the target audience that you're trying to figure out. Now, speaking of that target audience, it's also super important to think through who is that target audience. I think when we see the world through the lens of the social entrepreneur, we see big change. We see things really moving globally or nationally. And we want to, when we're starting off, we've realized that it's actually important to start at step one, which is who is actually working and who is being empowered by your implementation. Because at the end of the day, you might build something idealistic, but if you don't understand how your individual situation or your implementation impacts the exact individual that you want to be empowered, you might have a lot of trouble striking the real chord. Now, lastly, from my own reflections, I would say prioritize progress over perfection. This is one that we really see in social impact quite often, that any single time anybody puts a step forward, and that doesn't necessarily fit into the definition of the most impactful or the most perfect implementation of impact, there's a lot of people that like to throw tomatoes. And what we've noticed is sometimes we just have to step into the arena, allow people to throw tomatoes at us, but actually still be prioritizing action and progress. Guy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Perfect. Yeah. So I just wanted also just to mention quickly a topic of personal growth, which is it's, I think when you step into the unknown of impact entrepreneurship, it can feel like something that's very scary. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel like maybe you're isolated. And so there's a lot of kind of maybe fear around that. But at least from my own perspective, I would say it's such an empowering experience as well. And so there's been a whole journey of lessons learned, but it was really an invitation to actually go on that journey and learn about myself and learn about what it really means to have leadership also for myself, and take responsibility also for myself and how I work. So that's also been a key learning so far. So a little word on support. Dash, you mentioned this earlier. How can, what's the support we might be looking for right now? A couple of things stand out for us. One is we're looking to build an impact advisory board. So we're speaking to different people in this arena. And what we'd like to have is basically experts in impact for particular topics. So food, finance, energy, and then more broadly, advocacy. So any connections there, people have ideas or networks that we can get in touch with, please do let us know. There's the funding side, of course, always with entrepreneurship and especially impact entrepreneurship. Any subsidies or funding that people are aware of, they want to let us know, please do. And finally, reaching empowered citizens, so our target audience. We've shared a little bit about what Climate Guardians is today. We hope some of that has resonated with you, and if it does, please do get involved. We're going to share a QR code in a second, but also, let your friends know, let us know if there are people we should be talking to or networks we should be accessing.
You can create action even on this call. So you'll see that here we've linked on the left-hand side a direct QR code for you to beta test actually what we've put together. So on the left-hand side, you can beta test the EcoScore, where you can submit your name, a local store near you that you think would potentially be willing to adopt an EcoScore. And then once submitting, you are basically allowing us on your behalf to send a letter to that store. And if they reach back out to us, we'll definitely be informing you back to talk through the next sort of steps to see if we can impact and motivate that store to change its approach. Also on the right-hand side, beyond the EcoScore, we're co-creating actions with people as part of our beta community. So we've added a survey where you can talk through your preferences, whether you prefer to reach out to a local politician, join a local group, or even reach out to a cafe, as one of the stories that we told earlier was. So we invite you to also take the survey so that we can get a sense of what sort of actions might appeal to you and where you're based. And then we'll reach back out with a tailor-made action specifically based on your preferences. So we're going to pause there. That is sort of the end of our presentation. We want to challenge you all to click through these QRs and see how it goes.